All right, my dear brothers and sisters, thank you so much. I can see a lot of excitement among you. We are now ready for our final panel, and they're going to discuss what I know you want to hear. How do we strengthen the ecosystem of support? And our panel speakers today are Mr. Ong Teck Chai, Mr. Daniel Ng, and Ms. Denise Lim. Thank you. And today's discussion, the final panel, will be moderated by a research fellow at Caritas Singapore, and she is Dr. Krisha Vishenpir.
Thank you so much, everybody. Welcome back, welcome back. Okay, let's quickly settle down, find a seat. Okay. So I hope you enjoyed the breakout tracks and you were able to go deeper into the specific subject matters. So right now, we would like to build upon these conversations. I realize that, it's after lunch, energy a bit low, so we'll try and bring it back up again. We will try. Okay. So on this panel today, we have Mr. Teck Chai, Deputy Director of Residential and Fostering Services from Boys Town. We do have Daniel Ng from Catholic Family Life. He's a principal therapist. And we also have with us Denise from Caritas Singapore, who is a clinical psychologist. So fun fact, all three organizations presented here today belong to the Caritas family. So we're actually all friends. Okay, so to begin the panel, I'd like to invite each of our panelists, drawing from your respective roles, whether it's residential, family therapy, or clinical, what interventions have made the most sustained difference for youths with behavioral or addiction challenges, and what do you think makes it work over time? Maybe Teck Chai?
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. First, I must confess, I'm also an addict. There's no coffee, right, after lunch? Why there's no coffee after lunch? I'm a caffeine addict. So anyway, to respond to your question, I think coming from a residential perspective is always a little bit unique. So first of all, what truly works is number one, the structure and the system. Many times when our boys, our residents come into the system itself, they come from an environment where boundaries are a little bit blurred. The structure is a little bit lacking. So first of all, the structure itself in a residential setting, that's number one. And I think number two is very much then the staff and the relationships. I think through the panel discussions from morning till I got a bit of snippets here and there, a lot is based on relationships, where our staff across the board, whether you're a youth worker working with the boys, a social worker, a management team, even the admin staff, how we then provide that relationship and the safety net for the boys in our care. So generally, I would say those are the two main things.
Thank you, Teck Chai. Daniel, would you like to add on to that?
I think for me, from the family counseling perspective, when we have youth and children that come in with supposedly behavioral disorders or issues, very often I find that it is about listening to their story of pain. Where is the pain that they are experiencing, which is coming out in the behaviors that parents or the school may be dealing with or have difficulty managing. And once we can actually listen to their story of pain, where they feel they are heard, that they are seen, I think that is the critical part of the intervention that makes a difference. Many times I think they have tried. They have tried to tell parents, they have tried to tell people that they trust of their pain, but sometimes we have not heard them. And I think that's where I see my role very often, is trying to just help them to, to honor and to witness to their story. And from that position, they can start talking about, okay, what do I want to do about this now?
Thank you, Daniel. So lastly, Denise.
I think to build on something Daniel has said, so I want to comment on the flip side of the same coin. So while Daniel has talked about understanding their pain, if we want them to make change and move away from behaviors that are harmful to them, we also want to make an effort to understand why that would be meaningful for them. Because I think therapy is not just about reducing pain and suffering, but it's also about increasing a life worth living, living out a life that means something to them and not just avoiding pain. Yeah.
Thank you all. So with that, I think this flows very nicely into like what we would like to talk about. Earlier, Teck Chai, you talked about these close relationships that are built with the youth in these very specific contexts. And so residential care specifically often involves building close nurturing relationships. How do you navigate the balance between providing that relational support and maintaining appropriate professional boundaries with both the youth and their families? And is that balance something that can realistically be sustained in practice?
Thanks so much. I mean, that's really a very valid question. Maybe a little bit of background about myself first. So I'm a social worker by training. I've been in this industry for about 20 years or so. I've always been a children's home setup. And I also need to always remember my boss. I'm a social worker, because now doing management roles, right? So managing staff is a little bit different. But as a very young worker starting out, and I think a lot of our youth workers and social workers in the symposium here today can also relate to as well, is when we work with our clients and our youths, at what extent what does it mean to truly build a rapport? And at what cost do we actually do it as well? Is it really just be a friend? How do we then set very appropriate boundaries? How much do I self-disclose? I think in our practice, sometimes we always ask the youths, our clients, a lot of questions. Where do you stay? What do you like to do? But when they ask us back, oh, sorry, I cannot tell you. Or because, oh, why are you asking me all these questions? You ask me a question, I respond back with you a question. So I remember in my very early days as a social worker, my clients, my boys always ask me, can you stop asking me questions, just tell me, what do you like to do? So a lot of the boys or clients do want to seek to find a connection or a relationship. So it is truly very difficult to find the balance. But having said that, after being in the sector for a while, I also learned, in the very early stage, I think if SASW is here, my ethics might be revoked. I'm not very sure. Because a lot of things I do is a little bit cross-boundary. A lot of things is like really building a relationship and really going all out. But what I also realized after a lot of supervision and guidance from my mentors previously is then, why am I doing all these things? Who am I doing it for? Am I doing it for myself? Am I doing it for the client? And I think two key things to kind of strike that balance about professional boundaries and building rapport intentionally with our clients is then, don't do it alone. Do it as a team. It's not about you able to connect with the youth extremely well. It's whether it's the youth able to build attachment with everybody that's around him. To me, that's very important. Do it as a team. And number two, go for supervision, go for guidance, go for coaching. That's so crucial, to help understand that, okay, why am I doing all this? Am I working harder than the client? Am I working harder than the youth? Does the youth even ready for change at this moment in time? And I think it's really not a very certain answer, but it's really a journey where for every professional, every practitioner, they have to go through and kind of find that, okay, how do I find that balance between setting appropriate boundaries, what does it mean to build a rapport, etc., etc. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Daniel. I think you raised a very important point. Oh, sorry, Teck Chai. See, after lunch, I still can't remember names. And we're friends. Okay. Teck Chai. Sorry. Okay. But yes, Teck Chai raised a very important point. That we can't do these things alone. Nothing really works in isolation. So going off of that, I'd like to ask Daniel, because Daniel, you talked about the importance of family slightly earlier. You just mentioned it a bit. So in these close relational environments, in a family context where sometimes these relationships are already deeply embedded, how do family dynamics tend to support or sometimes hinder a youth's recovery or progress?
Well, that's a loaded question. I think all of us, if we belong to families, and I think the first premise is that families are complicated. relationships are complicated. And earlier I talked about the story of pain for our youth. But that alone is only one facet when we talk about a family. That's also the story of pain of parents, right? That when I'm a parent myself, and when I remember when my child or my son fell down and was crying and was in pain, I felt it. Not in the same way, right? But I felt helpless that I couldn't take away that pain, right? And so whenever I have a youth coming, or sometimes very often it's the parents who are bringing their youth and saying, I don't know what to do with him. I don't know what to do with her. She's defiant. She's not talking back to us, staying out late. We don't know where he or she is. And as they grow older, worried because now old enough to go drinking already, out with friends and don't know until what time. And there's a lot of worry there. And very often the parents also struggle with disconnection, that I feel disconnected from my child. My son or my daughter who used to come running to me, mommy, mommy, daddy, daddy, about all these things, now all of a sudden seems to have someone has snatched her body and her soul, and it's just a different being kind of thing. And very often when I speak with parents and the children, somewhere they have lost the way. Somewhere that disconnection has happened, but the desire for connection is still very strong. And so it's about navigating that space, trying to find a way back to each other. And I as Nicholas shared a little earlier, I find that a lot of helpful interventions for parents can be helping them to understand the brain, the neuroscience behind your child, your young person who may now be towering over you physically, but cognitively, developmentally in the brain, they're still not there yet. And we tend to look at them as adults. We expect them to behave a bit more like adults, but sometimes that doesn't click. And then we get fed up. We throw our hands up and we don't quite know what to do. But once parents are able to understand, oh, that's their brain that's reacting in the way that it should, given where it is now. Parents find that, oh, I don't need to fight this. It's okay, I can understand. Okay, you're just reacting. I don't need to fight this. I hear you. Okay, let's talk about this another time. Or, okay, you go explore, do what you need to do. But I'm trusting that you can be safe.
Thank you, Daniel. See, I got the name right this time. No, but actually to add on to that, Daniel, I wanted to ask you another question. Yep. But what about for parents who maybe don't recognize that perhaps their child is growing, changing, evolving, and still perhaps maintaining that same expectation that they had previously? How does this then impact the child moving forward?
So you're talking about parents who tell me...
A bit overbearing, maybe.
Oh, a bit overbearing.
Implications on perhaps the youth's mental health.
So they are resistant to sort of a different perspective. And they hold that my child is just being naughty or defiant. I work with the youth then to sort of say, what about you? How do I hold you through this, right? And trying to help in whatever capacity is possible for the youth to sort of see where the parent is coming from. And saying that if your parents are not going to change their perspective, what can you still do, right? To acknowledge their desire for connection, to acknowledge their pain, And I think with parents, sometimes I have to sort of be very direct and honest with them that what do you think is going to happen if you continue on this trajectory? What's going to happen to your relationship? What's going to happen when your daughter or your son turns 21? They're an adult. They can move out. They can make their own decisions. They can sign for their own surgery. What happens then? And very often that's a sobering thought for them. And they go like, oh, wait, hang on, yeah. But sometimes it's that mindset that, oh, maybe if my child doesn't listen to me, I'm a bad parent. And it comes from a place of guilt. And that's what I listen out for also, the pain of the parents. What is it that's keeping them locked in that perspective? And how can we introduce and maybe just plant a little seed to say, hey, I can see you're doing the best you can. And it's frustrating. It's difficult as parents. And sometimes just to have someone honor that pain softens their stance a bit. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Daniel. I think you raised a very interesting point that I would like to then ask Denise. Talk about the pains of the child. But sometimes I also feel that when parents encounter their own children who may be a bit difficult, there's a lot of exhaustion that the parents themselves take on. Not even parents, just caregivers in general. So regarding caregiver fatigue, Denise, how does caregiver fatigue develop and how does it impact a caregiver's ability to support a young person's recovery over time?
So I think a short answer to that is that caregiver fatigue oftentimes stems from love and concern. And this love and concern is so deep, so overwhelming that my child or this other person that I'm caring for, this person's needs become so amplified and the caregiver's needs starts to feel like it pales in comparison, right? So we can read up a lot about caregiver fatigue, but the general idea is that I want to care for you so much that it doesn't matter, my own well-being doesn't matter. And that's, while that comes from a loving place, it creates certain problems, right? Because, I mean, if caregiver fatigue, we think about common symptoms, right? Not sleeping well, not eating well, giving up a lot of my life to care for this person, then what does it mean about the carer's ability in the longer term to be there? How sustainable is that, right? So it's a little bit like, I don't know if y'all have gone on holidays before, right? And then y'all like share hotspot, right? The person who's sharing the hotspot is being kind and generous, but the person's battery runs out very, very fast, right? After a while, nobody got hotspot, right? So caregiver fatigue is a little bit like that, that I pour out from my own cup into yours, and at some point, everybody's gonna run dry, right? So I think sometimes when it comes to caregiver fatigue, when we see carers who are in that state in therapy, sometimes the conversation is, we try and turn the conversation away from how is your child doing, because your child has got you to look after them, but more how are you doing? If you continue doing this, can you still in the longer term do what you want to do for your child? Where does that leave your child? Where does that leave you, right? So I think over time, this person who cares to a point of fatigue will not be able to serve this intention anymore. So I think that's something important for carers to note, that I think sometimes pulling back is not that you are not a good parent, it's not that you don't care, it's not that you don't love anymore. But like Dr. Chris said this morning, right, in it for the long game, right? What's gonna help you stay in this long game? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Denise. I mean, the issue of caregiver fatigue actually really points out how challenging it can be for sustained support to happen within the family or any sort of ecosystem around the youth themselves. So in some cases, when that support weakens or feels fragmented, youths may begin to lose not just behavioral stability, but also a sense of meaning or direction. So, turning to all of you, how do you support youths in reconnecting with purpose? Teck Chai's been quiet too long, so we'll start with Teck Chai.
Sure. But maybe before I answer that question, just a very quick response about the caregiver fatigue as well. Because I do feel that even as professionals and practitioners, we feel caregiver fatigue too. And maybe I can share an example, not so much my own personal life example, right? So like for example, I remember, we all go polyclinics and see doctors from time to time, right? So I remember when I go and see a doctor previously to review my x-ray, and the doctor just say, oh, everything is clear, you're good to go. Less than 5 minutes, I waited for quite a while, less than 5 minutes chat, and we just leave the hospital, right? At the clinic. And to me, when I left, I feel that there's a lot more problems, but I felt that the doctor wasn't ready to hear me out. When I was asking the doctor, do you think this is a concern? The doctor would be like, no, it's okay, your x-ray is cleared, you're good to go. Then I think the doctor was so tired. Because 1 month later, I went to see another doctor. The doctor similarly was telling me things like, actually, your heart rate is a little bit fast. Have you checked your heart recently? Have you went for ECG recently? Maybe you should do a blood test. Have you been sleeping well? And things like that. Then I felt so supported. And as I think back in our practice with our young people, it's very similar. Sometimes when we go to work and we are so tired, dealing with every single request, especially the children's home setting. Where's my shampoo? When am I going home? Why I cannot come back later? Can I come back later? Yeah, all these requests, after a while, sometimes there is a fatigue from the caregiver's perspective, just to shut the boy out, But I think what we all need then is how can we take a step back, be a little bit more patient, and really ask a little bit more questions. And sometimes our youth do require that kind of additional care and love in that sense. So as I go one big round, right, what I'm trying to say then is really, how can we help our youth to find purpose and meaning in their life? I think it's always, how can we as professionals, we cannot work alone. It's really a larger ecosystem. I do agree family is definitely an important ecosystem. Because from a children's home perspective, they're always going to go back home. That's the ultimate goal. Unfortunately, some boys can never go back home. Then how can we then build the ecosystem around him? Whether it's the education institution, whether it's peer groups, whether it's spirituality, religious groups, these are the other ecosystems we can work with. So then, for professionals, how can we be a consistent figure? This is really not a 100-meter race. It's really a very long marathon. It's not like every time you ask for my help, I respond to you every single time. Within the first week, I get burned out already. Right? How can you be consistent with the youth, to be there, to be present, where they will feel safe enough to share? I think one thing that I took away, I think from Moses' sharing as well, that the temptation is always going to be there to relapse. The temptation is always going to be there. And am I creating an environment and a relationship that allow the individual to share with me when they are facing those temptations? To allow them to share with me, look, I failed, I relapsed. I need help. And I feel being that consistent figure for our clients, that will then help them see I'm not in this journey alone, and hopefully that will guide them to having their purpose.
Thanks so much, Teck Chai. I'm like traumatized now,
Okay, relax. I take over. Okay, I take over. I think as just listening to Teck Chai, the word, well, it's a buzzword nowadays, right? Sustainability. But how do we sustain also our parents and our youth as well? And even as earlier you were talking, the thought also about how are our youth resourced, and how's the family being resourced to be able to support the youth? Sometimes I get referrals, I get inquiries for counseling. Dear Catholic Family Life, can I bring my 5-year-old daughter for counseling? And we're like, 5 years old for counseling? Okay, would the parents like to come in first and just have a session so we chat and we understand what's going on? And almost every time, it's the parents who are struggling, that they are really at their wits' end. And if you think about nowadays, what's it like as a family? Dual income, both working. If you have kids, kids are in childcare or infant care and must pick up by a certain time. So, and then work never ends, right? The emails, you are constantly connected. So parents are also, in that sense, running. They have so many apps open. I use the analogy of a web browser with many tabs open. After a while, everything seems to slow down quite a bit. You can't get things. You don't feel on top of things, right? And then when your youth comes, face black, had a bad day in school, and parents' first question is, why your face so black? And how does the youth want to respond? The youth is not going to say, oh, Dad, you had a bad day at work, huh? Or, okay, take it easy, have a beer or something. It's not going to do that. The youth is just going to go, oh, forget it. I don't have a safe landing space today, even if I've had a bad day, right? So part of the work sometimes is really, as we assess, is really how's the village doing? How's the family environment doing? If you've got parents with 5 kids, right? It's not easy, right? Because there's so many things to attend to, right? So how's the family being resourced? And sometimes speaking with parents who say, what help do you need? What do you need to step down a bit, right? Yes, you need money, you need all this, but what about getting some help with childcare? What about taking some time off for you and your spouse, right? But very often they may feel like, I can't do that. I can't do that. Why? Because I've got so little already in the bank. But each time they keep on depleting those resources, they can't be there for the youth. And the youth, that disconnection can get wider and wider. So from a systemic point of view, if I work with any youth or any person in a family, we're looking at the whole family as a whole. What's happening there? What needs to change to help the whole family to blossom and thrive?
Thanks so much, Daniel. So Denise, purpose, how do we get youth to feel or regain a sense of purpose in their life if they lost it?
I think, okay, this may not be the world's most popular opinion, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think sometimes it's helpful to look at the purpose of this behavior that we are concerned about, be it vaping, drinking, smoking, whatever it is, right? Because I don't know about you guys now, y'all look a bit young. But back when I was in school, I'm not sure if y'all had this. We were taught all these behaviors no good, right? CNB came to do some like public education talk, remember sitting in the school hall, why cannot go home, right? These days CNB reaches out through, say, social media, there are a lot of adverts about this is wrong, that is wrong, if you do this, later cannot breathe, you're gonna die, and that sort of thing, right? And I think this resonates a lot with the youths that I work with, right? So when I talk to youths who struggle with these behaviors, sometimes what they tell me is that, yeah, the more I game, like, because this person spends a lot of time gaming, the more I game, the more lonely I felt. It's not that I don't know. The more I game, the less time I'm spending with my family and the more quarrels I'm having with my parents. So it's not like they don't know, right? So then the big question is, then why you still do, right? And I think to build on something that one of the, I think it's the KKH doctor that said something earlier today, right, is that these behaviors are functional. Perhaps through gaming, this person finds a purpose or finds a meaning that he or she cannot find elsewhere, right? So this question of how to help youth reconnect with purpose, maybe you don't even need to reconnect because the purpose is there. It's just coming out in a different behavior. Right? So sometimes I feel like understanding, like taking time to understand that what's in it for you, right? Because the youths all know that this is problematic. They can see it, they can feel it. Actually, when I see them as adults and I think back to that time, there's a lot of regret. If only I spent time with my friends back then, maybe I won't be so lonely now. Right? So rather than reconnecting, maybe it's to just learn to connect with the meaning of this behavior. So it's a difficult position, I think, for caregivers to take, because this behavior has caused so many problems in our relationships. So why do I want to talk about this behavior? It's very painful to talk about it, right? Can you imagine like parents having to talk to their children about gaming and knowing that, wow, the moment I open my mouth, my son is going to talk back at me, I'm going to feel so disrespected. They go into this conversation with a lot of trepidation, right? But I guess it's not just about talking about it for the sake of getting you to stop, but talking about it for the sake of understanding why is this so attractive to you. Can we find other things to do, right? So, if just now a speaker was talking about prototypes, right? If you're the achievement type, right? Is a gaming achievement all you want in your life? What does meaningful achievement look like for you? Can we try to work on that instead, right? So it's not to just minimize this behavior and say it's no good, because most times they know it's not the world's best thing to do, right? Yeah.
Thanks so much, Denise. I think we've heard like very comprehensive sort of response from different perspectives and different angles about, and also I think the different definitions of meaning and purpose to life. I've got a question I think that came from the audience perhaps. Daniel, you touched on the realities of juggling work, family, and personal life. What advice would you offer working mothers in particular, especially when it comes to protecting their mental well-being?
Working mothers in particular. I think for working mothers, my experience in the counseling space is the mental load. I think that's a word which when I was growing up never heard of right? But nowadays when we talk about and we recognize it, that the mental load of working mothers is very, very heavy, right? Traditionally, they're still seen as the go-to person for the children. And children do approach their mummies first. I don't know about you, I did for a long, long time, right? And I often joke that it's because mothers have a 40-week head start on the relationship compared to the fathers, right? So that's something we can't fight with. But I think for working mothers, it's really, again, recognizing what are my resources. How do I also make my needs known to my spouse, who is my partner, right? And if you think about partnerships, it's not 50-50, right? At least in marriage. Maybe in a company can, right? But in a marriage, it's never 50-50. Sometimes it's 30-70. Sometimes it swings the other way, depending on what that situation is. But I think similar to what Minister was talking about, that it's about connection, communication. I think these are very, very important to help a working mother sort of keep an even keel, right? To look after mental health, that would be important. And the connectedness is not just with the spouse, it could be with your family of origin, with the mother's own family, with her children, and with her friends, right? Sometimes we forget that, yeah, they had friends before they got married, and they would like to maintain connections with them. And it's important to sort of look at this holistically, right? I hope that answers the question.
Thanks so much, Daniel.
Can I add?
Yes, of course.
So I'd like to add on to that because I just want to give, as a woman, thank you for looking out for the women folk. But shout out to all the working dads as well. I think that's a crowd that is not the most prominent, right? So people see the working mums, I think it's just traditionally, right? Mums look after the family. But increasingly, the dads also want to step up in this generation anyways, right? So we do see the dads who come to our service, and actually the dads, when they struggle, first of all, harder for them to ask for help, right? It's not a language that a lot of men grew up with. And also, I have no research for this, I'm not like the prof that does a lot of research, but in my clinical experience, a lot of the men who come to look for help in terms of, I guess, caregiving for wife, for children, they really just want to be a good father and good husband. They don't know how because they weren't brought up that way, right? And they feel a lot like, I can't do it, I'm just not good enough. So working dads out there, we're looking out for you too.
Thank you so much, Denise. Take Chai, I think we've also got another question for you. If you could highlight one overlooked factor that practitioners should pay more attention to when working with youth facing various challenges, what would it be? Shall I repeat the question? Maybe
Yes, please.
Okay. If you could highlight one overlooked factor that practitioners tend to overlook, what would it be?
Sorry, my quick thought is, if I overlooked it, how would I know it? But okay, let me think about it.
Okay, like in retrospect, right? It's like, oh, if I thought about this before. Okay, so let's go with that.
Okay, okay, let me do my usual style, going around the bush, and hopefully I answer the question. So a part of me as a social worker, sometimes you have to work with the families, you have to work with the child as well, right? I think sometimes what we overlooked, at least for me, as I look back at my practice, is then the voice of the parents. Because from a children's home setup, the youth is always at the center of our case. So we always look at what is the best interest of the child, what do we want to do the best for our youth. And sometimes when we look at our own beliefs and growing up systems, we look at other families' functionality, it's very different from ours. And we always feel that, oh, maybe that's not the proper way of functioning in the family. But every family does function differently, as long as there's no immediate safety. I'm looking at the MSF personnel here. There's no immediate safety, they can remain to be at home. So I feel that sometimes we overlook the voices of our clients, where the parents, what do they want? And what does the boy want? Many of boys now cases do come from Child Protective Services. They are unsafe at home and they're removed from care to place with us. And despite that, a lot of them do want to return back home and do want to be with their families, And are we able then to provide a safety plan, protective factors, so that they can return home in a more timely manner, And I do feel that's something that we do overlook as practitioners, that we can really come in a little bit more timely, with something a little bit more where it meets the pace of the parents and the child. I do feel that there's a window, right? Where when Nicholas shared about the window of 10 years, right? I also feel that in our home care setup, there's also a window of intervention, that we can work with the family and the child together. And once we've missed that window, sometimes either the parents feel like, you never engage me, suddenly you want to return the boy back home. Or the boy is like, after so many years I'm away from home, then you ask me now to go home. So I think at the forefront of it, of reunification efforts and reintegration efforts, must be at the start, when the point of admission. What is then be the permanency and discharge plan of the child? So I think as a professional, I feel that that's something we could look at a little bit more with more intention, so that we don't miss that window of opportunity. I don't know what's the window, but there's a window of opportunity.
Ken, thank you so much, Teja. I think that really does actually answer the question. All right, so before we close for this panel, and I'd like to really shift our focus to the future, because I think what we've talked about so far is that, again, to reiterate, is that support for a youth goes beyond just working on the youth themselves. It's also working on the ecosystem around the youth in question. So whether it is the family, whether it's taking care of the mental well-being of the primary caregivers, whether it's teachers, practitioners, counselors, I think everyone needs to be in that protected state as well and part of their ecosystem. So with that, looking ahead, right? So what does an ideal ecosystem of care look like to you? And this is for all of you. One that truly supports sustained recovery. So whether sustained recovery is even a thing that we can talk about, but or something close to it. What is one shift that we would all need to be closer to that goal? I can't take Chai some slack. So Denise, we start with you.
I think the first thought that came to my mind is that we need to do a lot more upstream work. Like a lot of the talk today, I mean, I was sitting at a booth behind for most of the today, but the things that I've heard are about building relationships, building connections, building communities, giving the young people something meaningful to do, to belong to, right? And that shouldn't only start when the youth is a youth. That shouldn't only start when the youth has got behaviors of concern, right? So if we think about an ecosystem, perhaps something a little bit more preventive, something a little bit more upstream, right? Like how can we foster relationships, right? Parents who struggle, for example, from when the kid is young, like how can we help them out, right? Or even like for the people who don't have the luxury of having meaningful family relationships, how can we help them younger to build meaningful friendships, for example, right? So I feel like the ecosystem needs to start further up, not only when there are problems.
Daniel?
Yeah, I think I echo Denise's perspective. It's to me, it's really to work further upstream, but how far upstream? Maybe just offer you a perspective that imagine if our youth grew up well adjusted, that they've been told, you're great, just as you are good enough, you are enough. And they grow up feeling they may have meaningful peer relationships, they are well liked, and they are told that their worth goes beyond their grades, beyond their achievements. And then they meet someone, they get married, they look at their partner as being someone that they want to spend their lives together, build a meaningful family, and then they have children, right? And they grow up in that kind of environment where both parents are well adjusted, all very well aware of their worth, and they perpetuate that into the next generation. That to me is the ideal kind of family situation. And then of course supported by extended family, schools are very well resourced in terms of looking out for holistic development rather than just grades and all that. I mean, to me, that is where I would see the ideal kind of ecosystem from my perspective professionally.
Thanks so much, Daniel. And lastly, you've got Teck Chai.
Yeah, I think I do concur, and upstream work is definitely crucial. And I think in the many years of the sector, there's always been a focus on upstream work. And I think the evidence is also quite evident at this moment in time. So from a children's home setup, there used to be so many children in children's home. Boys Town used to have 200 over residents. Now I only got 50 residents. Is that, I don't know, is it due to the 0.87 or is it due to other factors? But having said that, there will always be situations where families will fall through the crack. And the upstream work, the most ideal state will not then be possible. So the question then is really, when they do fall through the cracks, how can then be the ecosystem come together? How can schools, education institutions, social service agencies, families as well, to come together as a network of understanding youth development. No, of really having that, and I think I kind of said that earlier as well. How can we create an environment where the children and young person will feel safe to share their struggles? And it's because it's okay to struggle. It's okay to make mistakes. And it's okay to relapse, for whatever reasons. But they don't feel the need to lie. They don't feel the need to conceal. They feel safe enough with an adult figure, whether it's in schools, in the communities, in their own peer groups, that they have a safe adult figure to share that with. So what I do hope then, how can we have that ecosystem of support? While of course complementing with the upstream work, which is definitely very crucial. But then that's why I think we always talk about, as social service practitioners, how can we work ourselves out from a job, right? So I do hope that one day will come, but I don't think in my lifetime. But yes, I do hope that there's one day that the system, everyone is so well adjusted, that there's no trauma passing down generations. That would be definitely the ideal. But yeah.
Thank you so much, Teck Chai. I think in summary, what we can really take away from this is, again, like I said, it's realizing that caring for the youth is not just putting the youth front and center, but sometimes it's also considering who's around them and who needs to be around them consistently. I think what I'm also hearing is that it's important that we don't, although Teck Chai just mentioned it, I think Daniel hinted at it, generational trauma, making sure families are healed sufficiently so that the youth themselves don't have to face the same problems and don't have to keep passing on those problems progressively throughout their life, even to their children later on. How do we break that cycle? What I'm also hearing is upstream work from both Denise and from Teck Chai. I think upstream work in general has been something that we've has always been spoken about, but what is upstream and where do we find upstream? How upstream is upstream? How do we even find out what's actually truly wrong? I think for most families, if your child is misbehaving, okay, your child is just being naughty, but is this really just naughty or is this something else? So again, upstream is a bit of a question mark. But I guess this is where we leave those questions with you, because I don't have the answers. But before we close, thank you all for sharing such considered and practical insights and for helping us reflect not just on the challenges, but also on what may work moving forward and what we would all like to strive towards. So with that, I would now hand the session back to our MC.
Thank you so much, Krisha and the panelists. Big round of applause for our last panel for today.